Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden, your host for today's program. I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston and director of the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at Tier Memorial Hermann. I'm really glad you tuned in with us for today's program. It's an important one that affects everybody's life. And before we start the program, there are two things I want to do. First, I want to ask you a question. If you are disabled or know someone who might need assistance in evacuation prior to a storm, prior to any other kind of disaster, how do you register so that people will be available to help you in the time of need? What number do you call? We'll answer that question before the end of today's program. But right now, we want to provide a special treat to all the loyal watchers of Focus on Abilities. We're going to preview the exceptional work done by the HTV crew in producing our newest promo. Roll the tape. I'm Lex Frieden. Welcome to Focus on Abilities. We started Focus on Abilities in 1990, and we've been on the air for more than 2 decades. Our program provides information that affects the lives of people with disabilities. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I hope to be so for a long, long time. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll be right back with Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
You're watching Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden. Today we have a guest who can talk about a subject that's important to everyone and anyone who may be watching this program. Michael Walter. Michael, thanks for being on Focus on Abilities.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Now, Michael, your job is with the Houston Office of Emergency Management. And in that capacity, you're responsible for talking with a lot of groups and providing a lot of education about what to do in the event of disaster, how to prepare, how to respond, and so on. Do you focus a lot of that effort on the population of people with disabilities?
Well, we focus all of our efforts, our public education efforts, on the entire community, whether that's folks with disabilities, without disabilities, folks who may not speak English as their first language. We look at our entire community. We are very aware that a large portion of Houston residents have disabilities or have had disabilities or have family members with disabilities. So that's a key part of our messaging, is making sure that these folks have the information that they need ahead of an emergency so that they are not caught off guard by an emergency and don't have the resources and services that they need during the emergency and when we're recovering from those different types of emergencies as well.
Now, I know that a lot of improvements have been made in the communication system pertaining to people with disabilities, particularly people who are hearing impaired and deaf.
Yeah.
Some of those improvements have been made as a result of improvements in technology, generally speaking, but they've also been made because you all spend a lot of time after each event trying to figure out what we can do better the next time. And I believe there have been cases in the past, use for example Katrina in New Orleans, where 3,000 people were killed. Half of those were people with disabilities or elders. We learned a lot as a community about how to respond to disaster in the case that there are people with disabilities in the community. And as you pointed out, there are people with disabilities in every community.
Exactly.
So what are the other kinds of things that, or all the things that you can think of right now that have been done to ensure better communications with the disabled population?
Well, over the last couple of years, working with our partners in the federal government, there are a lot of new programs and services that are being offered to provide multifaceted emergency notification. So in the past, you may have gotten a phone call with a message telling you that there was an emergency. That worked for those of us who can hear, but maybe somebody who can't hear would either need that in TTY or in some other sort of accessible format. and that wasn't available. So working with some of the notification systems that we have available to us, as well as some of the notification systems that are available to our federal partners, such as the National Weather Service. There are a lot of new technologies that are being used to alert people when there is an emergency. Many of you, if you have a cell phone and we have had a flash flood warning or a tornado warning, or even an Amber Alert, you may have seen a message come across your phone with a different ringtone that is a new thing, and you may have wondered, when did I sign up for this? What app is this coming off of? Mm-hmm. It's actually part of a new federal program to help expand the reach of some of those emergency messages. It's called the Wireless Emergency Alerts, and those are available right now here in the Houston area to the federal government. So our partners at the FBI and the National Weather Service have access to that. And it's really only supposed to be used for emergencies. Things like tornado warnings, flash flood warnings, things that pose a threat to you and your life. Here in the state of Texas, we also use it for Amber Alerts, so you can push a message to an Amber Alert. That system is customizable, so you can turn off Amber Alerts if you don't want to be receiving those on your phone. You can turn off the alerts altogether. However, we really don't recommend that you do that, because in the middle of the night, if there's a tornado warning for your area, that's something you're going to want to know to make sure that your family is safe.
Now, Michael, if those didn't appear on your phone magically, how do you get them? For example, my wife gets these alerts on her phone. I don't. Maybe I'm not registered.
Well, the system actually doesn't require any kind of registration, so that's the beauty of it, and it's actually geographically located. So it's pretty much wherever your phone is. What we're seeing is that some folks are getting them and some folks are not getting them. Those folks that are not getting them tend to have older phones that don't have the technology to be able to receive that. So moving forward, all the new cell phones that are coming out now are going to be compliant with this technology. So they're going to be receiving these messages.
So is there any website I can go to get alerts in advance?
So there are a couple of different notification systems for the city of Houston. We talked a little bit about those wireless emergency alerts. There's no registration process for that. Basically, that is something that just happens on your phone if your phone is capable of receiving those messages. So then we also have two other systems here in the Houston area. One is called Alert Houston, which is operated by our office, and it's an email notification system. So you'd get an email message when a large-scale emergency is occurring. This is something we might use for leading up to a hurricane impact, and we want to consolidate all the city's emergency information into one message to get to you. We'd be doing that and pushing that email directly to those subscribers. There's also a system that's run by the Greater Harris County 911 Emergency Network. That's called the Emergency Notification System. Now that system already it's basically a reverse 911 system. So you can receive a phone call when we have a high impact type of an emergency in a smaller area. So something maybe like a hazardous chemical spill where a neighborhood needs to shelter in place. That's the kind of messages that's delivered by that system.
Now, the last two, do you need to go online and register for that?
Those two you do, and you can actually find links directly to those registration pages from our website, houstonoem.org, and you can register right there. One thing to mention about that emergency notification system, the more localized one, is that they have expanded that to include cell phones. So you can register your cell phone and tie it to your address, but it also allows you to receive those as text messages, which for those who may not be able to hear a phone message, that's an ideal type of message for them to be receiving.
Okay, and people with hearing impairments who need access to the new system that is text-oriented and will alert people with hearing impairments, follow the same rules. Go online and register for Alert Houston
and the emergency notification system. You can do all of that directly from houstonoem.org.
Okay, that's great. Very important for people to have that registered. Now, we want to talk about another process of registration, one that involves people who may need assistance in evacuation or other supports during or after an emergency. We'll do that right after we take a break here. We're here today with Michael Walter from the Houston OEM, Office of Emergency Management. We'll be right back with more Focus on Abilities. You're watching Focus on Abilities. We're talking about a disaster preparedness and disaster response. And we have as our guest today, Michael Walter from the Houston Office of Emergency Management. We said we were going to talk about registration, and Michael, you can register for alerts. But if you have a disability or other kind of functional need, you may also register for evacuation assistance and possibly other assistance you may need after a disaster occurs. Can you tell us a little bit about that system? I know a lot of people used to register with 211 for transportation assistance, but we've recently expanded and modified that program. What's the story?
So the state of Texas in the past had a program called the Transportation Assistance Registry. This was specifically for the coastal parts of the state, for those folks who may need assistance in evacuating ahead of a tropical storm or a hurricane. The success of that program was so overwhelming that they started, and with some of the other emergencies we've had in Texas, they realized that that had a lot of value for more than just hurricanes. It also has more value than just for the Gulf Coast parts of the state. So what they've done is they've expanded that program to now include the entire state of Texas, but also to focus not just on transportation, but any other kind of service that may need to be provided for somebody if they have a functional or access need. So
well, let me ask you about that. In many cases, people with disabilities will be power dependent. They will have batteries for wheelchairs that need charging. They will have batteries for chemo pumps that may need charging. They'll have other kinds of assistive equipment and devices that may need power. If they register with STEER, with the new 211, will this help them in any way?
It will help them in some ways. Obviously, we're going to be focusing on those primarily, especially in a hurricane type of situation, those folks who need to get out of harm's way right away. But having that information helps us to direct our emergency services into the correct areas. It also helps us with planning. If we see that a significant amount of people are power dependent in a specific area, we can work with Centerpoint, we can work with some of those other agencies to make sure that those people have power, we can't guarantee that we'll get them power back, but we are able to kind of focus on those areas that might need it more. This is also very helpful in other types of evacuation situations. Here in Houston, it floods. If we end up with a bayou that is flooding and we know that there are some folks in that area who may not be able to get themselves out, who may be dependent on electricity, and we've lost a significant amount of electricity throughout the city, we're able to plan a little bit more and kind of direct our operations to make sure that those people who are the most vulnerable get the assistance that they need to preserve their life and preserve their well-being.
Now, we talked about transportation assistance, and people may need that who are not disabled, technically speaking. They may be unable to drive for one reason or another, or they may not have a vehicle. The transportation assistance may be helpful to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have a way to evacuate yourself in a hurricane or any other type of an emergency, we want we want you to register as well, because that helps us to identify you ahead of an emergency, especially if we have a couple days notice like we do on a hurricane. We're able to work with Metro, work with some of our other partners to get you the assistance that you need in order to evacuate. So even if you don't have a disability, but you may just not have adequate transportation to evacuate yourself from the Houston area in the event of a hurricane or any type of an emergency, we definitely want you to register as well.
There's one very important point I think that people need to keep in mind about this. If you are registered, you will not necessarily have a pickup in front of your home if there's a disaster in the Gulf or elsewhere. You will only see that assistance in the event that you are in a registration zone. Is that correct?
If you are
an evacuation zone.
Yeah, if you're in a mandatory evacuation zone, those are going to be our primary focus, because those people are the ones that are in harm's way right now. So we need to be able to evacuate those people first and foremost. If you don't live in a hurricane evacuation zone, doesn't mean that you're not in a place that may be evacuated in the future. We have hazardous chemical situations, we have flooding, we have a lot of different types of situations that might need for us to evacuate a portion of the city. If that's the case, if you're on that registry, we have your information, and we're able to make sure that we can get the correct assistance to you during an emergency.
Okay, and Again, that's 211. You need to call 211 and register. If you've done it before, do it again. The lists are cleaned each year. So you must call 211 and register, and I urge you to do that now when we're not even looking at any kind of pending disaster. But you need to register with 211 if you need transportation assistance for evacuation, or if there are other special needs you may have in the event of a disaster. This system only works if you're registered. Now, Michael, sometimes people, for one reason or another, don't get registered ahead of time and they need assistance. Should they call 911 or are there other options?
Well, if you live in the city of Houston, we want you to keep calling 211 until, for a storm about 24 to 48 hours before. Then you'll start hearing on the media that you need to start calling 311. But we don't want to get that far. We want you to register today if you can. Call 211, register. There's also an online registration form on our website at houstonoem.org and a paper registration form. So if you're not comfortable with the internet, if you don't want to do that over the phone, you can actually download a paper form. Or if you have a community organization and you want to distribute those forms out to those folks, you can download that from our website, send it into the United Way here in Houston, and that'll be your registration. So there are a variety of different ways for you to register. We only want you to call 911 if your life or your property is threatened.
Okay, but registration is only one part of the process a person has to engage in to prepare. You will only have evacuation if you need evacuation, and most people won't need evacuation. So everybody needs to be prepared to stay for a week in case of Hurricane Ike. My home was without power for 2 weeks. And people have to have enough things packed away. Medications, durable medical equipment that they need. They expect to go to the store. They won't be able to do that. They need to stock that, and also food and water.
And we want you also just to have a plan. Know whether you're planning to stay or planning to go. We tell everyone to have 2 emergency plans: plan to stay or plan to go, because in some situations you may stay, some situations you may find it better to evacuate ahead of a storm. Even if you're not in a mandatory evacuation zone, but say you're power dependent, you have an electric wheelchair or some sort of medical device that requires electricity, it may be smart in your situation to evacuate ahead of time, even before those mandatory evacuations are called. That way you're safe, and we much rather have folks be safe and be proactive and be their own emergency responders so that they have the freedom to be able to do that.
I want to emphasize that point. I'll come back to that right after this break from Focus on Abilities. Before the break, we talked about early evacuation. Michael Walter from the City of Houston Office of Emergency Management is here with us today. And people with the most severe impairments, people who are power dependent, people who are people dependent, people who need a lot of care in the home and whose care routine might be interrupted by a disaster, need to really plan ahead. And think about this. If you wait until the evacuation warning is called for your area, then you're going to be stuck on the road with how many other hundreds of people who are evacuating based on the announcement that they just got as well. And I'm not sure that every person with a severe impairment has the stamina to manage long drives. Short drives become long drives when there's a lot of traffic, you know that. So people with the most severe impairments need to think about maybe leaving before the disaster is even pending in the area. We obviously can't do that every time. If there's an explosion, we may not have forewarning. But in the case of the most frequent disasters in the Houston area, hurricanes we know about while they're in the Gulf. We know about them usually 48, even longer hours ahead. And if you have a plan to go and stay with family members in another part of the state or in an adjacent state, that'd be a great time to take a vacation, to take a break, to take your stuff and get out of town. There's no point in waiting until you might be caught in a long traffic line or something else. But in the event that you are here in Houston and you have decided to hunker down or stay in place, and your area is called for evacuation, be assured that pre-registration on the 211 system will enable the authorities to know that you need some help, and they'll do everything they can to help evacuate you. By the way, Michael, we didn't talk about it, but the 211 system is so sophisticated. People are able to tell the providers there that they have a pet, that they won't leave at home, and so they can make arrangements with the evacuation assistants to travel their pets and other required material they may have, and even family members who may need to be evacuated with them, correct?
Exactly. That program is very comprehensive. It takes a little bit of time to register. It takes about 5 minutes to register, which is really not bad in the overall scheme of things. But it's very comprehensive. It asks a lot of questions because that's a lot of information that we need. And that information stays confidential. I know a lot of folks are real nervous about disclosing that they have a disability or disclosing that they have an impairment of some kind to an official agency, but we don't really use that information. We don't really touch that information until an emergency occurs. So that information also remains confidential and is only used by responders.
Now, Michael, I think it's also important for people to know that they shouldn't depend on the public authorities. I mean, in the case of a disaster, the police, the fire, the mayor and the city council and the governor and the county judge and everybody else have a long list of things they have to deal with, and they have to juggle a lot of balls. And if people wait for help from the local authorities, sometimes they'll wait longer than they might need to if they prepared themselves. So it's so important for family members to be a part of your plan, for neighbors and for other people who care for you to be a part of the plan you make.
Absolutely. We want everyone to have a really comprehensive emergency plan, thinking about what are the things that you need on a daily basis, making sure that that's part of your plan, and making sure that you as yourself, through your social networks, through your communities, have the ability to meet those needs. We're here as a government to provide services, but we can't provide services to everybody all the time. We just don't have the resources. And you will be much more comfortable if you are able to plan ahead and do that on your own and be able to get out on your own and do things like that. You will be much more comfortable. It'll be much more of a pleasant experience because you will be able to control those types of things. And so we really want everyone to have a plan to stay, a plan to go, depending on what type of an emergency it is, and make sure that you have everything that you need and you're in contact with the people that you need to be in contact with to make sure that they are part of your emergency plan.
Just briefly, I know a lot of people are concerned if they are evacuated about where they'll go. I'm sure that you can't tell them a priori exactly where they'll go. That's all dependent on the circumstances. But we can tell them that shelter providers now are doing much more than they ever have done before to assure that people with disabilities are accommodated in shelters.
Absolutely. All the Red Cross shelters that we send folks to are going to be ADA accessible. The shelters are going to be located across the state. So depending on what type of an emergency we have, depending on where that storm is tracking, obviously we're not going to send somebody over into harm's way anywhere else. So we're looking at how do we do that. So these shelters, however, it is very important to mention that shelters are not necessarily the most comfortable environment, especially for somebody who may need extra assistance. So if you have the ability, they are available, but if you have the ability to stay with friends or stay with family or to get a hotel room or a vacation home or something, that is a much better situation than going to a shelter.
But if you are evacuating, it's also advisable, if you can, to bring your own caregiver, your own provider, your own assistant, because again, in the shelter circumstances, there are people helping other people, but if you need additional assistance, it'd be great if you could bring somebody to help you.
Absolutely. If you have, an assistant that helps you on a daily basis, or you have a service, talk to them about what they could do for you in an emergency. If that means you have to leave the city and you got to go to Dallas, or you have to go to Austin or wherever, would that person be able to go with you? Make that part of your emergency plan, because that is, especially if that is essential for you to survive and to do well, you want to make sure that that person is included in your emergency planning.
Okay. At the beginning of the show, we said we'd advise people about the number to call to be prepared. That's 211. I think we've discussed that. Michael, I want to thank you for being our guest on Focus on Abilities today. I think we've had a very interesting and useful show, and I appreciate everything that you and your colleagues are doing to help all of us and the public be prepared for disaster.
Well, thank you, Lex, for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Now, those of you who are watching need to call 211, but you also need to be prepared along with other family members. You need to have your family as part of your plan. You need to know that if you do need assistance, people will do the best they can to assist you, but everything is not predictable in the case of a disaster. So the things that you can do to prepare yourself, if it's necessary for you to evacuate, have a plan so that you can go someplace ahead of time. And if you depend on the local providers to assist you in the case of an emergency, be assured that they will do everything they can to make sure you're comfortable and cared for during that time. But most importantly, if you have to shelter in place, and that's the most likely circumstance here, be sure that you have the supplies you need, that your batteries are charged, that you have some alternate mechanism of getting the power you need, and that you have help that may not come in the case of a disaster. So you need to have local people who can help you. Don't call 911 unless it's absolutely necessary. If you need to call 311, do so. They can try to help you. And be sure that you're registered for 211. Really, we appreciate you watching Focus on Abilities. This is a program for the whole community. I hope you who are not disabled enjoyed this program and learned as much from it as those of us who are disabled. And I want to thank all of you for watching again. Thank HTV for producing the program. And please join us next time for more Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Herman, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.